Never has the time been more right for the marriage of art and science with regard to marketing and communications. If you just look at one single fact, you are going to be blown away by how quickly the world has changed. Almost 50% of all media today is consumed digitally. It's a huge number. I mean, think about that. Almost 50% of all media today is consumed digitally. Over half of that digitally consumed media is delivered via mobile. So the world has exploded, yet marketers, if you ask a marketer today, tell me about your digital strategy. Can you define your digital strategy? What they're going to tell you is something that sounds more like random acts of digital, right? Versus a comprehensive, holistic communication strategy informed by data that very clearly defines the digital strategy with key performance indicators and data points that prove whether it's successful or not. And in that alone is the explanation for why the models are broken today. The marketing models today are completely broken. And companies that don't go back and reinvent these models are going to be irrelevant to the consumer going forward. Now, I want to walk you through how we did this, but before I do that, I want to put a little disclaimer out in the marketplace. I'm a CMO. I am not a data geek. I'm not writing code. I cannot tell you one single thing about the technical side of this. I'm over 40 years old by a lot, and I don't come from your background. What I do come from is a heavy marketing background. Procter, J&J, Kraft Foods. What I do come from is a world that has seen the shift take place and marketers who don't get it. And what I can help you understand is how we're looking at the world and how it might help you influence the world. Billy Bosworth, the CEO of DataStax, recently was interviewed and asked, how does this whole big data thing evolve? And he said, a quote that I think is so amazingly profound. He said, 10 years from now, when we look back to see how the era of big data evolved, we will be stunned by how many decisions we made that were completely uninformed, had no information available whatsoever. And that's the world we've been living in. We've been making decisions based on really bad information. So what I want to help you with is how we thought about improving the data flow, improving the information to make better marketing decisions, right? Now, you'd have to be an ostrich with your head in the sand not to observe there's a transformational shift happening in the marketplace today. It is an unprecedented transformational shift in that it is incredibly affecting 3 of the 4 biggest pillars of any business: the consumer, the customer or the commerce by which the consumer purchases products, and the communication landscape. Incredibly big pillars. Any one of those pillars would offset a business in terms of how you navigate it. But all 3 are happening at one time, which is what makes it unprecedented. The good news for a marketer is being led by the consumer. So if you've got a consumer problem, you've got a marketing solution. Now the consumer, you know it well. It's the millennial and the Latina, right? The millennial consumer today is really the new mainstream, despite the fact that many companies don't see the millennial consumer today as the new mainstream. In fact, they are. They're about 5% bigger as a demographic cohort than baby boomers, right? 18 to 34, 40% of millennials have families, incredibly tech savvy. They adopt brands completely differently than any cohort prior to them. They have influence tremendously, and they're here for the next 30 years. For the next 30 years, they will transform the world as we know it today. Latinas, 17% of the US, they feel like they're 40%, right? Because they punch above their weight. They have aspirational cultures. They're entertainers. They're politicians. They feel much bigger than they actually are. The scary thing about Latinas is that they are going to represent over 75% of the growth in the US over the next 10, 15 years. So if you don't win with millennials and Latinas, you cannot win. right? So let's take a step back. Ex-CMO of Kraft Foods, I'm not just talking to you about consumer products, because that would be a silly thing. There's too many of you here who don't touch consumer products specifically, right? I'm talking to you about any industrial vertical, life sciences, automotive, insurance, financial, travel and entertainment, consumer goods, any vertical where the consumer has transparency and the consumer has choice. That's every single business today. Because where the consumer has transparency and they can see how they're being charged or what other options exist, and they have choice to go elsewhere, you are officially now a marketing company. It's throwing players into the marketing space that has never, ever, ever been thrown in that space before. And if you are not following this consumer and their change in terms of how they're purchasing products and their change of the customer space and their rapid adoption of digital and mobile, then you are losing your return on investment. Your investment dollars you're putting in against that consumer are diminishing. You're not getting the returns for it, which means your business isn't doing well. And when your business isn't doing well, what happens? They go back and they cut the spending, right? So it's this dangerous do loop. So you step back and you say, okay, so what are the consumers, what are the marketers doing it? Like, how are they thinking about this? I can tell you, they're incredibly confused. You deal with a lot of these people. They are confused, and I'll even go further. They're almost paralyzed by what's happening externally, right? They're scared to make a move. They're scared because historically they have always been in service to the consumer. This is nothing new to them, right? What is new is the new inputs. Historically, one-way communication. You were a marketer, you had a brand or a product, you defined the brand bundle, you priced it, you sent it out across the distribution channel, you communicated it to the consumer got it, thrilled. They went and purchased it based on what you told them, they believed you, repeat, repeat, repeat. Great model. Doesn't work like that anymore. Today, the consumer has as much influence over a brand as a marketer does. The consumer is having conversations sometimes the marketer's never even seen. The consumer is deciding what kind of brand, what's the ingredient stream of the brand they want to buy. And now the marketer is having to chase it with tools that aren't built to chase. It's a crazy conundrum. If we go further, you really push this out, the consumer in today's world really has become the new CEO. Think about this. They are setting the agenda for the products they want, right? They are telling you what is the ingredient stream, what is the profile, what is the look, how do I want that product to be? They've also become the head of R&D, the head of distribution. Where do I want to buy this product? If you're there, great. If you're not there, I'm not going to buy you. By the way, I'm going to tell you what I want to pay for that product. So literally, that consumer's become the new CEO. And if you ignore this point, you risk losing your business. Now, the tough part about this organizational shift is today, if this is true, the smartest person in your organization likely is your most junior talent. Has to be, right? They're the closest to the consumer. Actually, the people who are the most dangerous in this equation, I hate to say it, is the current CEO, the current executive team. Because the world they grew up in, the models they grew up in, the way to think about marketing doesn't exist anymore. The consumer cohorts they thought they knew, they don't exist anymore. What we're seeing about this new millennial consumer is as they come into that amazing life transformational stage, having kids, they're not changing their behaviors. Every cohort prior to them, when you hit adulthood and you have kids, in food you opt for convenience and you opt for value and you opt for simplicity. These consumers know as they grew up, they wanted cleaner ingredient lines, less processed, locally sourced. And that's what they're doing as they become adults and parents. This is causing every senior, every significant food manufacturer to go back on their heels. Because all of a sudden, you've got to change your portfolio, change your brands, change your communication, change your customer distribution zone. You've got to change your price. Everything is shifting at a time which, by the way, costs are going through the roof. and you've got to manage your costs down. So it's an incredibly difficult time. And I think the question you have to be asking yourself is, so what do you do when you've got this going on? What do you do? And I would tell you that if you asked a marketer today, do you have an ed tech problem? Is your problem ed tech? 99.9% of those marketers would say, I don't have an ad tech problem. I don't have an ad tech problem. I got a growth problem. I don't know how to grow my business in this new world. There's so many things going on. Ad tech is not even on their horizon. Now that's tough because ad tech is going to solve the communication landscape, but only if it can fit within a marketing mix that develops tools and capabilities that marketers can use in a turnkey way. That means these companies, the Krafts, the Kellogg's, the Fords, the GMs, the Cokes, the Pepsis, they've got to shift to new models so that they can develop the tools and the capabilities to begin to grow these businesses again. Now, when you do that, you go back and say, okay, and I did this as the CMO. Okay, let's go back to the very beginning, because when your business starts to have problems, you always go back to the start and say, okay, when was the last time we were growing? What was it that was so great about this brand? And let's see if it lights on fire again. Now, the good news about reinventing models is that in marketing, there's something really amazing that doesn't change. The 4 Ps. This is the icon of what every single business is built on. The 4 Ps of marketing, they don't change. What does change? A whole new set of inputs. A whole new set of inputs like data technology, new cohorts, new media vehicles, new retail channels. Through the filter of the 4 Ps, now require companies to develop a new set of capabilities in terms of how you get to consumer insights, how you get to better targeting, how you get to better engagement, how you get to real-time decisioning. And if you do this well, you do this right, develop capabilities that become turnkey for the marketers to use, then a strange thing happens. You have the opportunity to increase your return on investment, and not just in one level of your marketing mix, across every aspect of your brand bundle, every aspect. And so you've got to go here if you want to shift an entire industry moving it forward. Now, when we look at data, my marketers were seeing data. You see data. I don't need to see data. What I need to see is people. I need to know that within the data that I'm looking at, I am seeing individuals. Because if I can see individuals, and if I can see individuals at scale, for the first time in the history of marketing, I have an opportunity to identify real behaviors that can drive me towards real insights, that can drive me towards competitively advantaged insights, that enable me to shift my brand to become more relevant to a new consumer in a new way. That's what I've got to see. I'm not asking for names. I'm not asking for personal information. Anonymized, non-transactional is fine for me. I want to make sure I can get to individuals. So we called this Agile and Addressable Marketing. And it was really about getting the right message to the right consumer at the right time to drive purchase. That was it. And we looked at it as a reinvent of marketing, because we had to reinvent all the tools and the capabilities the marketers were doing. Now, if you do this well, the ability for you to be precise and accurate, the ability for you to drive a much bigger bang for every dollar you are spending increases tenfold. This literally means you are going from demographically defined consumer cohorts delivered through a medium to individuals at scale delivered agnostic to the medium. Frankly, I don't even care what medium it takes me to get to that consumer. If I know every time I am getting to the right consumers with the right message and it drives purchase, I'm agnostic to how it gets there. I'm excited about being agile and addressable. Now, for us, we stepped back and we said, there's really 3 pillars of Agile and Addressable, right? First, you've got to have data. You've got to have a significant amount of information that you know about the consumer. Second, you have to build an infrastructure to harness that, to action it, right? To make it a repeatable action. Third, you've got to have content. You've got to have a way and something to say to consumers that they want to engage with you on. If you have those 3 things, being agile and being addressable in today's world, you're golden. So let's dig into that a little bit. You talk about data to anybody in the agency world or anybody in the marketing world, and they have a much different perspective of data, right? Data's numbers, it's spreadsheets. This data, as you know, is incredibly high quality, amazingly insightful data. It truly becomes the portal of every single behavior your consumer is having today. Harnessing this data and understanding it becomes imperative to you getting to breakthrough insights and ultimately influencing every part of your marketing mix. Kraft had the benefit of placing a bet on big data 18 years ago. Now, they didn't call it big data. Matter of fact, they didn't know it was big data until about 2.5 years ago. But about 18 years ago, they brought together their portfolio of brands. So the Kraft Foods portfolio has brands that participates in every meal and every snacking occasion throughout the day, every holiday and entertaining occasion throughout the year. So we're a portfolio that was really active with consumers. So 18 years ago, someone said, let's bring all this together, let's action it, let's bring solutions to consumers that involve our products through recipes and recipe activation and recipe site. And in fact, that's what we did. Today, over 100 million consumers come through the Kraft recipe site every single year. Unique visitors, 100 million. We served up about 6.6 billion digital ads every year, digital ad impressions. So we were collecting a tremendous amount of data, and not just data, amazing first-party data. The highest quality, most transparent, freest, cheapest data you could get. And that became the engine, right? We then overlaid it with purchase data and additional third-party contextual data to better lay out this consumer. On the consumers that were coming through the recipe site, we were collecting data across 37,000 different attributes. It's a lot. We knew a lot about how consumers were using our brands and how they were cooking with our brands. So that was the foundation of the engine we were driving. Second, the infrastructure. We looked at the infrastructure on 3 different elements. First, we said, we've got to develop a social listening lab. We called it the Looking Glass. We've got to look at trends and consumer conversations and competitive launches and how our communication is doing. We've got to be able to do this globally. We've got to be able to look at this by consumer cuts, and we've got to be able to pull out of that actions that we would want to go take. Second, we've got to build an infrastructure that holds the data, that has a data management platform so we can cut the data, and a demand-side platform that we could purchase programmatically against that data, right? We built that. We called it Parallax. Third, we had to develop advanced analytics that got us to ultimately multi-touch attribution modeling that would make us smarter with every decision so that we could get to real-time decisioning and real-time activation. That's how we built the infrastructure. Now, content is incredibly important. I would contend if you have data and you build the infrastructure, content really becomes king, right? It's got to be incredibly flexible. It's got to be efficient. Consumers have to want to engage in it, but it really is king because it's what drives your engagement going forward. And for us, content that was share-worthy, that was sticky, that consumers wanted to share out, we tackled on 2 different fronts. First, on the recipe site, we activated specifically against recipes. And so we developed over 30,000 professional culinary recipes that we served up. We had consumers submit about another 30,000 recipes to that site. Consumers touched our recipes over 1 billion times a year. So we had a ton of content that transcended the entire year. In addition, we put out a published a publication that was both for Latinas as well as Gen Pop. And that publication had an incredibly high connection. It became the #1 recipe site for Latinas worldwide and the 7th largest recipe site for Gen Pop. So we had a way to get to content. That was just on recipes. We then did the similar thing on our brands. So before I show you some examples, I just want to give you a perspective of why we went this way instead of what a lot of our competitive set went in terms of defining the consumer connection programmatically. So a lot of our competitors in the industry went after programmatic and went after it with an incredible amount of zeal, right? And programmatic is fantastic. It is absolutely a breakthrough invention, and it's good for everybody. It is a very efficient way to get to digital purchasing, right? But the key here is that it really is an efficiency tactic, and that's great. But our vision was bigger and it was longer term. It was really about how do we get to the most effective consumer, because sometimes the most efficient consumer is not the most effective consumer. Sometimes the cheapest consumer is not the best consumer you can get into your franchise. If you pay just a little bit more sometimes, you get a consumer that might be a heavy user, and that consumer's got a lot more value to you. So if you can somehow figure out who that consumer is, if you can find that consumer and engage with that consumer, and if you can move that consumer to purchase, that's an effectiveness play. It's a play that enables you to win on the programmatic side of getting to efficiencies, but it also enables you to get to the best consumer and build your database. And so that was the difference for us. Now let me show you a couple examples of how we did this, because I tell you what, if I can do this with bacon and Velveeta, I am confident you can do this with any brand in the world, right? I mean, how silly that we can do this with a bunch of consumer products. You guys have way more important businesses that you're engaged in. So let's talk about addressability in action. So I want to start with a very, very simple one. One of my all-time favorites, and a simple one, I think, to get your head around. The bunny cake. I love the bunny cake. I love the bunny cake because it combines 4 Kraft products, right? And so for every bunny cake we sold, we made a lot of money because 4 products went into it and we won, right? The tough part about the bunny cake, though, was it was seasonally driven, and as you communicated out about the bunny cake, you found a funny thing happened. A number of consumers don't celebrate Easter. You wasted that media. A number of consumers celebrate Easter, but they're not baking. You wasted those dollars. A number of consumers had health issues, right? Stopped eating sugar. Diabetics, you wasted those dollars. And so as we approached 2014, we said, we've got this amazing recipe that it's our #1 recipe during this Easter holiday. Is there a more efficient way for us to get after getting those consumers with the bunny cake? And so we targeted consumers online, but we targeted them based on whether they celebrated Easter, based on whether they were baking, based on whether they had kids in the household, and we were much more specific about how we targeted them online. Similarly, we've backed up and we looked at anybody who had been online before, and we targeted and interested with the same attributes, we targeted them offline. And then we looked at our third-party data and we matched those characteristics and those behaviors to additional consumers. We then sent out the bunny cake recipe, and in the month of April, we increased sales by 23%. 23%. We increased our return on ad spend, not by 1, 2, 10%, 4 times, 400%. Because we got much more focused about how we delivered against that consumer, and we did it in a much more effective way. We went after consumers who actually would action this purchase. Amazing. That was the first one, creating custom segments. Second, Crystal Light. Love Crystal Light. Crystal Light has a problem. If you haven't noticed, and if you're a soda drinker at all, you know, the carbonated soft drink category has been declining for a number of years. Consumers are abandoning a lot of these products in lieu of new age products, in lieu of Red Bull, in lieu of water, right? So we had a powdered soft drink business that was challenged and declining. We had to figure out a better way to drive communication and connection on the powdered soft drink business. What we also found was about 40% of all consumers rejected powder because they saw it as artificial and would only engage with the product that was liquid. So we developed a liquid concentrate, a individually improved liquid concentrate, and we went after the Crystal Light consumer and said, if we can cut this consumer into 3 segments, right? Fashionistas, people who are interested in fashion, people who are interested in celebrity, and people who are interested in weight loss, right? That's how the data broke out, those segments. And if we could determine whether they were new users open to liquid or if they were powdered users, and if we could determine what kind of flavor profile was right for them, then we could customize our segment and we could serve up tailored messaging to drive activation. Beyond that, consumers who engaged in that message, we were able to retarget with a coupon. So all of a sudden, we were able to take dollars where you had a lot of waste, because at least 40% of consumers were not even engaged in the category, and you were able to drive tremendous efficiencies. How did that work out for us? Well, we saw about a 2 to 3 time improvement on our advertising spend, and we saw an increase in brand favorability of 11%. Those are huge numbers that didn't cost us any more money. Third question. Okay, if we can customize targeting and we can serve up tailored messaging, can we customize targeting and can we get to dynamic content so that on the fly, we don't have to develop all this ad. On the fly, we can use current assets and engage with consumers. So we ran a test against our salad dressing business. So what was interesting about salad dressing is through the looking glass, the salad dressing team began to see consumers moving towards salads for dinners. Interesting, like they've been tracking this for several months. Clear, consumers were eating more and more salads for dinner. Step back, they overlaid purchase data and said, okay, if we know they're buying vegetables, and if we know they're buying protein, and if we know they've bought a Kraft product, can we serve them up a recipe from our recipe site that ties all that stuff together? In fact, we can. And we can do it dynamically so that it just automatically happens. We did this, we had interaction rates on those recipes that were 3 times the industry benchmark. Blew us away. Amazing, amazing way to use data and activate it against assets. Last example. We looked at content. Now, a lot of brands are doing a lot of tremendously creative, inventive, breakthrough content. And you see it play out all over the place, and we've got lots of examples of that. What I wanted to show you, though, was an example of how we stepped back and we borrowed content, because we had a Planters business. A Planters business that was not especially strong in terms of the profitability of that business. So Planters didn't have a huge budget where they could just go create all this content and throw it out to consumers. They literally were trying to challenge the consumer to consider eating nuts, peanuts specifically, in lieu of other perceived to be healthier nuts like almonds, right? So for some reason, I'm sure because the almond board did an amazing job in their communications, consumers think almonds, pistachios are healthier than peanuts. Did you think that? Yes, no, maybe you did, maybe you didn't. It's all right, they're not. They're pretty much head-to-head on the nutritional front, but for some reason, peanuts don't have that health benefit. And so the Planters team stepped back and said, we can't develop all this content. How do we step back and get to content delivered efficiently? How do we do this so that we target our current users, competitive almond users? How do we do this targeting men and women separately? And what they did is they borrowed content. So they went to Men's Health and they went to other books that had appropriate editorials taking place. They borrowed the content, they slapped on a creative message from Planters, and it was part of the Planters complete reinvent. The year Planters team ran this, they turned the business completely around. Now, this was not the only thing that happened. That was a complete reinvent of the business from soup to nuts. But in fact, it was a key part of how you resurrect an advertising budget that is small and has to be mighty. And it was an efficient way for us to do this. So what this brought us to is you've got to think differently about how your models work, right? Because historically, we think about the brand and then we get a creative idea and then we blow it out through mediums. But really going forward, you've got to understand your consumer. You've got to understand where your consumer is. So you almost have to think about media first. And when you know all the different places you've got to take your message, then you come back and develop the creative idea that you blow out across all those channels. It's a complete reversal. We looked beyond digital, and I loved what Ari said this morning in terms of his most recent announcement and as well as the message he talked about this morning with the elephant. Because a marketer looking at any one piece of this mix at any one time is going to believe they've got the story, when in fact they've just got a very, very small amount of the story. So be it with digital. Digital's an important part of the equation, but it's not the total marketing mix. Today, print, radio, TV, soon to be, and digital are all able to be addressable to the household level and, frankly, in a lot of cases, to the individual level. Think about how powerful that makes you as a marketer if you know exactly what consumer you're talking about or talking to, with what challenge you have to overcome in order for them to get in the consideration set, and you're having a one-on-one dialogue with consumers. That changes the equation completely. And so we started to test TV. Now, incredibly manual and not turnkey, but to see if the platform we had built could in fact transcend all these different mediums. We did a small test with Kool-Aid. It was incredibly impactful. The scale was too small to share the results, and I never shared them publicly, so I won't share them now, but I will tell you, the idea of getting to addressability at the household level on TV, incredibly powerful, and that day is coming, and it's not 5, 10 years away. I would contend it's 2 to 3 years away. Not far, not far. So when we built this entire infrastructure, we built it with this ecosystem in mind. If we had incredibly strong, high-quality data, if we understood this consumer better than anybody else, right, then it would inform the content we could pull together and build. And if we built great content, and it was sticky content, it was content that wanted to be shared, and content consumers responded to, then consumers would engage in it. And if consumers engaged in that content, we would get more data that would make us smarter, and the flywheel would be built. And that's exactly what we did. We went out to build a self-sufficient ecosystem. And with this, we rolled this out to the marketers. We tested it for the last 15 months. We rolled it out to the marketing community in January of this year. In terms of capabilities, in terms of tools, the results that were delivered before this ever got rolled out, just by being smarter about how we got to consumers with the right messaging, were amazing. This was the next step. But I'll have to tell you, I don't think there's a lot of companies out there who are connecting the dots in terms of what the dashboard is that marketers need to turn. I think we're answering a lot of questions in a silo instead of looking across. And so I do think I'd be a little remiss if I walked away and didn't tell you the 5 things that I think really are going to be what's in front of us in terms of the industry, regardless of whether you're an agency or a supplier, whether you're a marketer or you are in operations, finance. This really is, I believe, the things that we'll see shifting going forward and what marketers will have to get their arms around, regardless of the industry. First one, I do think the concept of addressability replaces the concept of digitalization, because addressability is a much larger platform within which you can communicate to consumers at the household level. Now, if that is the case, cross-device identification becomes an imperative, because I am going to waste dollars if I'm communicating to all what I believe is a bunch of different consumers across a bunch of different devices I'm going to waste money outbound. And importantly, when I run analytics against that data, I'm going to get the wrong read in the analytics. So understanding who that consumer is and which devices he or she is matched to so I can ensure that I'm delivering a message to a specific individual, agnostic to the device, will improve both my activation and my analytics. Incredibly important, right? First piece. Second, one-on-one content at scale is the new consumer expectation. Think about it yourself. You get irritated about a product, you get irritated about a service, your first reaction is, I'm going to tweet, I'm going to send a message, I'm going to get back to that company, that brand, I'm going to tell them what I think. Your expectation is someone's going to get back to you, right? It is unbelievable that over the time of my career, that consumers would ever believe that companies would be able to respond back immediately to their concerns. I mean, think about it. But it is, in fact, what consumers think today. You might love it, you might hate it, you have to embrace it. They expect you to know them on a one-on-one basis. They expect you to know them and deliver content that's relevant to them. And they expect you to respond to them when they have a concern, or else they will move on to the next brand that can do that, period. Third, the consumer is the new channel, right? It's such an oxymoron. This requires a complete mindset shift, right? Because my channels, I know my channels, they're TV, they're broadcast, they're digital, they're print, I know all my mediums. What do you mean the consumer is the new channel? You can't target a channel and expect to get to the consumer. It's way too expensive today. You're dealing with way too much waste. That doesn't mean TV is going away. It is not going away. I would never prognosticate that it's going to go away. What is going to happen, though, is you're going to be much more selective about those messages that you do want broadly communicated and way more specific about what you want to say to whom and when. Knowing who that consumer profile is intimately and understanding how that consumer gets the information will dictate the medium and the media strategy that you're going to go after. The consumer's the new channel, and you have to shift that perspective. Fourth, this new consumer, this new millennial, they expect complete transparency on brands and on companies. I want to know what your ingredients are. I want to know that you're a good to your employees. Think Glassdoor. Think Whisper. Think Secret. I want to know that you are a good company and you are involved with the community and that you're locally sourcing. I want to know that the brand that I choose to purchase is a brand that I completely believe in. And think about the brands that the millennials are flocking to. That's what these brands are. They want to see that you're good. Now, they're not rejecting big food companies in terms of the brands. They love those brands. Pop-Tart, Hamburger Helper, Philadelphia cream cheese, they love those brands. But what they're saying is shift to the right ingredient stream, shift to a good employer, shift to being good in the community, and you will get my business. And if you don't, you won't. That's amazing. That is tremendous power, transparency. Fifth, and I end where I started, marketers are really going to be required to marry art and science. And I would contend marketers have always dealt with the science of running a business with the art of how you deliver a product to the marketplace. But today, the demands are that you are so much more tied to the data platform, to the IT platform, to understanding these consumers in this new way. You have to have skills developed here, and they don't exist today. Marketers don't have the skill set. So we got very close, very intimate, and I would contend almost married our IT department. That is the model going forward that I believe all marketers will have to get to. So with that, I hope it hasn't bored you at the end of the day. I hope you're sitting back thinking, oh my gosh, if Velveeta planters and Crystal Light can crack this, anybody can crack this. And I hope you have a great day. Thank you very much.